Good morning, everyone. Thank you for coming to our next session. It's my pleasure to introduce Jim Hicks, CISO for Avaya IT.
Thank you, Carol. Hello, everybody. A little background. Spent 30 years in Verizon. 1 year in CA, and then I got this opportunity to come to Avaya as a CISO and start the department from ground level. So it's been a journey, but it's my first time in CA world, and I want to thank Brian Steelwagon and CA for inviting me here today. So I never knew it was this big, but it's very nice, and I'm really learning a lot. I hope you are. We're going to do a little overview on what we're doing at Avaya. Mike Regar talked a lot about transformation, and you'll see that theme with Avaya as well. We're a very similar size to CA, and we're into telecommunication and video collaboration technologies, and we're going through a transformation for the last, I guess, couple of years now. So you'll see how identity really plays a huge part in a company's transformation. Being as old as I am, I remember all these products from 4 or 5 names ago. For example, Privileged Access Management used to be CISO about 2 decades ago, I think. Of course, Single Sign-On, which is now CA SSO, that was SiteMinder. And you know the rest of the story. So I've probably been using the tools longer than CA has had them. But I will say this, CA's done a lot for these products. They really scale well. And I've been fortunate to have evolved and matured with that scaling. We'll get through the typical openings here. So when I started at Avaya a couple of years ago, they had the typical single sign-on and the identity minder, the older ones, the R6, the R8. They were very KTLO in their approach to security products. They had focused all their, like most companies, all their efforts and funding on products, new solutions for their customers. And they were, had a very stable SSO, very stable identity minder. When we got there, we said we need more advantages. So we wanted to pursue that. So we laid out their identity products in some phases, and the first phase was really to get the older stuff caught up. They were just approaching end of life when I started there, and so we worked with CA, partnered with them to get those upgrades done and started, and then start looking at some of the new features that you probably have heard about with these products already. The phase 2 was obviously get onto the new single sign-on, take advantage of the secure proxy. I can remember days when we used to write that proxy. We called it a trusted gateway, and we wrote our own. And while I was working with the IDM Logic team, which is now part of CA, they introduced us to Sigma. So I got pretty excited about a front end. You may remember the products were typically back end. They assumed you had a front end. So seeing that front-end capability to hook up some of these things is a tremendous advantage that we're taking advantage of as well. And we also have manual route management, which I've never enjoyed myself, but we're now launching the privilege management tool. And then you'll see some other stuff with governance that we are trying to do too. I'll get through these here. Now, one thing that we are doing besides identity, we're doing a massive transformation of SAP. We're going from probably about 14 versions of it down to 2. And that is a huge project. It's been like a 2.5-year project. So you'll see this green light connector that we have to use and get connected to. And that's where the governance piece is very important to us. We have a lot of governance requirements with our invoicing with our customers, and really excited about trying those together and get out of some of the manual modes. Just to give you an example of the sizing, it's not quite as large as what I was used to in Verizon, but it's about 300,000 customers and partners. We've got about 20,000 employees and associates. And we have about 100 apps. 20 of them are federated, and those are increasing very fast because of the clouds. We've probably got about 10 different cloud initiatives going on. The 1,900 server endpoints for privileged access management is another scope that we got. Bigger than that scope is our BU labs. If you may remember, Avaya was part of Lucent, and before that, Bell Labs. So it has a huge R&D environment in our company. So even though IT may have a couple of thousand servers, the R&D environment has about 15,000 servers. So we're also looking at that, how we're going to leverage that and consolidate it and virtualize it more and more. The other thing I think is very important to these products is how can we get the provisioning much more streamlined, much more interactive with the user. If you were at the Identity Suite presentation a couple of days ago, you saw that nice way they integrated that thing. That is what we want to do also. Get that integration with these products, get that front end with the business user, and really get it more easier to use, but not sacrifice the security. As a CISO, usually ease of use to me means sacrifice security. And I always have a business owner saying, Jim, your security is just so obstinate, I can't deal with it. So as we do this, we want to make sure that we put in those controls tighter and tighter, but make it easier and easier in the front end, more transparent. So that's a huge goal. And typical security paradigm is, there's always a wall to hit. And we got to make sure that the wall is there, but very invisible, very transparent, very easy to get through. So our first task was setting up the R12 environments parallel to these older environments because we couldn't stop the business. Now what complicated that was we were moving data centers at the same time. So you can imagine trying to build an environment and the guy saying, don't build it there, build it here because we're moving here, but you can't build it there until we get this finished. So we went through this circle a lot trying to get these environments, and IDM Logic, and they sort of suffered through some of this with us while we balanced this challenge. And then we were using the old Federation Manager, and as you may know, Secure Proxy now, you can put your federation through that, a lot easier. You can also use it for agentless approach as well. So we are really taking advantage of SPS and making that easier for us to move. So our federated apps have been transitioning a lot quicker than our typical web apps because of that. So I highly encourage you to look at that if you haven't. The thing that amazed me when I came to Avaya, they had a very stable environment, but they did not have an active-active environment. So we spent a lot of time building that active-active relationship with these new data centers so we would have that capability. So that was like doing double the servers and double the network and on and on and on. Another thing is they were on a very old directory, so we've had to upgrade the directory at the same time. We actually started with the directory first and worked backwards into the front ends. The other thing that we've suffered through a lot is the SAP consolidation, competing with the data center consolidation, competing with the identity installs. So it's been a real challenge coordinating all these transformations at one time. We also migrated the R8 identity minder. We've had some challenges with some of the front ends of that product. It's not part of the product, it's a custom front end that the company wrote. And they had misplaced some of the code, so we've had to sort of work around that challenge. And that's where we're going to use Sigma and rewrite some of those things as we go. The governance piece, a lot of manual controls, so that's why we brought Governance Minder into the arsenal and started working some of those drivers. I mentioned that we're moving the whole ERP of our company, but we're also moving our provisioning to our customers to new applications. The CIO that works there now, I worked with him in Verizon. So he has had a history of doing application provisioning for products and services, so that we are revamping that. And that has really driven a lot of this new infrastructure, this new push that we're doing, as well as some of the challenges with breach management that all of you are probably seeing. I mentioned that some of these things were end of life, so we weren't able to get the support that we wanted from CA, even though they are very friendly about helping us, but they couldn't officially take tickets and stuff, so they encouraged us to get on with the R12. We brought in some resources to do that. One challenge that I had when I started there, all of this was outsourced. It was KTLO, outsourced, frozen. So when I came, I had to not only try to learn what was insourced, could be insourced, but I had to staff for it, because we had 0 staff for this. So the first year that we started staffing up SSO and privilege management and those kind of tasks. So while we were trying to build this, we're also staffing it. So it's very, very challenging trying to do that and keep up with the old one, keep up with the new one, and now we got them running on half and half because we're still in the middle of some of that transition. I mentioned the vulnerability and the breaches. One of my roles as a CISO is to work on the investigations and the cases with law enforcement, FBI, and local. And one of the things I see most in all the cases I visit is identity being compromised. 92% of all breaches that hits the world begins with identity. And it's mainly because over the years, people have really treated it very lightly, made it very easy, but it's also very easy for the guy compromising you. And even with some of the cases we worked, we saw this pattern. So our approach is to tighten this up, make it stronger, put the controls in, and start fighting them hard with the identity. You heard the last presentation focus on some of those things, and that's a very important theme when you want to take on these breaches. Last year was the record breach year, and American corporations really suffered it with data breaches. And I'm sure most of you are seeing a lot of attention from your companies in this area. So I can't highlight enough how much this identity and access management means to that. Another challenge that we had, because it was outsourced, the information was not current on the applications. They had a run book, and they were just sticking to a run book that had been out there, a couple of years or so, and it wasn't current. And someone like me coming in, developing a new staff, we're asking all these new questions, answers weren't there. So we had to do a lot of detective work to get the applications understood, figure out who's going to stay around, who's going to get decommissioned, and how we're going to integrate these apps into some new 21st century applications. So our first job was stop the outsource and begin insourcing. And we spent a lot of time with that, as well as developing the application inventory that we wanted to make sure got through the system. We probably decommissioned, about 20 or 30% of the apps. So you can imagine the churn that was going on during this information gathering. We also enforced an inventory approach to make sure these apps are tracked, their functions, their future functions capability, because we are, besides doing these identities, we're doing a lot of mobile work in mobility, which I'm sure many of your companies are doing that at this moment. So I mentioned that we worked a lot with the application owners. We came up with an approach called Securitypox, and each application group, we named a POC for the group. And we educated the POC on these identity technologies, gave them about 30 points to be concerned about, and we started getting them to be our detectives and bring this information to us in an organized fashion so we could start profiling it better. And then we took these apps from these POCs and we created waves of transformation. Some of you have experienced in SSO, you know, some of these apps have to be grouped for authorization issues and things like that. So we did them in ways to hit the groups and make sure we effectively migrate them during their release schedules, rather than be our own release. We're trying to time with their release schedule so we don't disrupt their agile approach to their application delivery. We communicated this plan to the stakeholders and the management so they could understand how important this compliance and this migration is to their apps, because they had been so used to it being a static situation. So after we set up that parallel R12 environment, you know, the biggest issue was trying to get this group from R6 over to R12 and move it in an effective manner. And we're still in the middle of that, because some of the groups had to staff up like me, because some of those apps were outsourced as well. I mentioned some of the features that R12 had, like the SPS. We are also launching a SIM and a SOC, and I can't highlight enough the valuable data that's in these products that you can pull into your SOC and your SIM and start keeping up real time with identity violations and thresholds being exceeded. We map some of this data along with the network data so we can start seeing real time and not waiting for someone to tell us what's happening to some of these identities. Our customer base, you know, they change people just like all companies would, and we have to keep up with that change. You mentioned in the last talk, he mentioned sending emails 2 different ways to get validation of those changes. That's very important because these IDs do churn a lot with the customer and the partner. We also deployed some new naming conventions so we could organize this thing a lot better and achieve a more operational efficiency. Our staff is split between 3 continents, the US, Asia Pac, and Europe. So we have a 24-hour around-the-clock team now following this stuff. So it's very important that this information get documented and communicated within the team and around the application teams. And I mentioned that we've set up these latest environments so we can reap these benefits. Here recently, we were able to get partnered with CA and get the identity suite where it's more integrated. My experience over the years has treated these products as 4 different products. This is our first opportunity to really blend them together and bring them into a very good experience. So I really applaud CA for putting that integration in place. It's going to be very valuable to everybody. And then the functionality I think that we've seen is we have so many cloud offerings and so many web offerings that we're trying to get this integration is very, very critical. So it's very imperative that you meet with these app groups, understand where they want to go with their products and their solutions, and how can you get ahead of that and actually inspire a better experience from their perspective, because they get very focused on their features and they're not thinking about the security controls or the security enforcement or the enablement that you can provide them. So I would encourage you to get very, very close to these application teams, understand that application, learn as much as you can about their function, their customers, their targets, how does the identity play, how does the role play in that. As I mentioned earlier, we're hitting all types of users. We're hitting the internal users, our partners, our customers, but all 3 areas have distinct different requirements and needs in identity and in role management. My team, I spend most of my team working through use cases of these 3 categories. These use cases are critical to understand how you want to put these products together and integrate them to those use cases and how to demark them. And then once you have that, you'll be able to enable their features and benefits much faster and much more thoroughly. I've seen too many implementations where they start off with a couple of critical features or functions and they miss a lot of the subtle ones. So I can't encourage you enough to put all that down on the board or the paper or the computer and really categorize them. Work with your HR partners, work with your business partners, really understand those use cases from their perspective, because they won't understand your side of the house. They won't understand the technical side, but you need to understand their functional side. And then put yourself in their position. How would I better use that function? And also put yourself in the hacker. How would I better attack that function? You know, one of the functions of my department is to do just that. How do I attack something and how do I break it? And I'm always amazed when I go talk to these application groups, they never think in their QA process to try some of these things. So get very close to the QA group, get them to script some of these approaches and these challenges, put them in your QA process, because if they're not covered, they will be taken advantage of. And it's very important that they're aware of this, not just you. You don't want to come in after the fact with some law enforcement situation or some customer telling me I was able to do this to my app. So that is worth its weight in gold with these products. Well, we mentioned secure proxy. I wanted to make sure that we talked about those benefits. The role repositories, the SAP one particularly in our company is very complicated because our billing, our invoicing, all that stuff that the partners use, and the partners go right into that invoicing function in our company, those roles are critical and they have to be subdivided by partner, by company. They get very complicated very quickly, and it gets very hard to understand some of the security violations that can happen unless you challenge those groups with those roles, make sure they understand the delineation of the characteristics of those controls. So you'll spend a lot of time probably doing some education with those projects because their main focus is get the next feature out, the next function out, and they're not thinking about these controls because those controls weren't requested by the customer. I once had a project tell me, Jim, we don't want to do the security because the customer didn't request it as an enhancement. And I always tell these projects, I said, well, did you request seat belts when you went to buy your next car? Did you request that airbag? Did you request precision steering? Things like that. These are foundational. And that's why you have to communicate these foundational things to these projects. They're customer focused. They're not thinking these foundational controls. They're not obvious to them sometimes. And getting that communication with those projects is critical to making sure you solve the security. Just turning the product on won't do it. You've got to work this layer. And then the next thing that the CIO always asks me every week, Jim, how much of this is automated? We don't want to keep hiring people. We want to automate, automate, automate. So take advantage of that product. Find out a way to automate it, yet keep that control first and foremost in there, but transparently. So this is what it looks like now with our company. We've got these the identity governance pieces in there. We've got the access management. We've got the identity provisioning, of course, the single sign-on. And we've got the new directory. So it's pretty much a brand new identity infrastructure. And we're very proud of this and see a lot of future functions and features that we can leverage with this. The next place we're taking this is mobility, mobile device management, cloud management. So it's very important that these techniques are leveraged so you can do that more securely. A lot of companies are going completely cloud and they assume that security is in that cloud. It's not. Most cloud providers will work with you with your own security, but don't assume it's there. You know, it's meant to be an ease of use, a very economical approach. And I know most of my business counterparts come to me, well, we've done the cloud and you know, we think the security is fine. And I go out and test it and I say, it doesn't have this, doesn't have that. You need to think about these things before you turn it up. So make sure that you're thinking of those terms with your business units. You know, they're anxious to get globalized and get that business going, and that's our main goal in the company is profit, revenue, but you gotta make sure you know what you're using in the cloud. There's so many versions of it, so many types of it, and it's there to be leveraged, but you've got to protect yourself. It's your role, not theirs. Lessons learned. Always maintain an up-to-date application inventory. I'm here to tell you that's the most important thing I've learned this time around doing these products. I was amazed how I had to go dig for some of this information. Make sure you communicate that strategy to these stakeholders. If they don't understand your strategy and where you're going, they're going to be fearful of you and avoid you, and your deployment will be much slower. And you don't want to have that happen. Also, plan the migrations around their releases. As you saw in some of these other theaters, Agile and DevOps, that's the theme now, going faster, but more thorough is the theme. You've got to build your piece into that. Not wait to the end, get it in the front of it. That way it won't be so obstinate to them and they won't resist you. They'll actually embrace you. And then challenge them to have a POC, like I mentioned, a SME, someone that knows you and you know them and you have that trust of communication. At the end of all of this, people have to communicate to be successful. It's not one group versus another. You got to be locked in, just like DevOps and Agile and these APIs and all this. People have to do that too. It only works if we're connected. So I can't emphasize that enough. Get a SME in each one of those groups. Make sure they understand where you're going. Make sure you understand where they're going. And then I think the success factor will go up many, many times. I think another challenge I've seen with applications, they're caught up going so fast that they don't keep up with their patches. They don't keep up with their versions either. I can't emphasize enough in this day and time, keeping current, very, very important, very important. So one of the reasons I preach this POC and this SME is to keep this currency moving very fast, not waiting a year or 2 or 3 when it's convenient. And that's it. Any questions? All right, well, I'll be floating around if you have, oh, here's the one. Carol, can you help him?
Hi, I have a question regarding the phases you went through. I saw Sigma as one of the product that you got in. And I want to know from understanding the roadmap on how you were able to accommodate. The early version of Sigma was very buggy.
It was. Actually, one of my friends from that project's here, and we've discovered that when we had IDM Logic on the floor, and they were sort of shy about offering it at the time because it wasn't part of the arsenal. But they had done it because traditionally these products were back-end oriented, not front-end. The Sigma gave us a good chance to start helping us do that. Most of the front ends are, coded by the company itself. And so you may be accurate about some of the bugginess, but my front end, I can't even find the code to now. I would trade one for the other, but I think now that it's got integrated and it's getting integrated with the Identity Suite, the opportunity is going to keep going up and getting better.
What benefits are you seeing with the latest version?
We've spent a lot of time with the use cases, so we haven't got it turned up to where we want it. We're still working those use cases because my team wanted to jump right on it. I said, no, I want to see all the use cases. I really am anxious to get more of a business front end, like the class that you saw a couple of days. Who went to that class a couple of days ago with the Identity Suite? That was real enlightening. That's where I'm sort of at myself, is how can I get it easier? Right now, our process is create a ticket, that kind of, that's old stuff. That's 20th century stuff. So we're in the middle of that, to be honest. We're not soup yet on Sigma. At first, we thought we'd rewrite this portal that we have. And then when I discovered some of its fallacies, I said, well, let's see how much Sigma can take on, and then let's write what it doesn't take on, plug it in, and then I'll take what it doesn't do and ask CA, can you do more? You know, put an enhancement to it. Great question. Yes, sir.
Hello. I would like to know how challenge was for you implement role and compliance in your project, and how much information you had from the customer for the roles, information about position and everything else, and how do you drive it?
Well, I'm ashamed to say I had started from zero. I had no information. Because they had outsourced it and had lost some of the key intelligence, I had to just develop a go find it and build it approach. So, you know, they had some, but I had to call a few former employees, ask them questions, then I had to bring some people in, say, okay, we're going to start from the ground here, let's build it back up. I've sort of gone through this cycle a few times in my past roles. Also working, when I worked at CA for about a year, saw this with a lot of companies. You know, the cycle of in-source, outsource is sort of like distributed, centralized. It goes round and round depending on the economy and what's going on at the time in economics. So I think that's the challenge I saw. We're much better off now after 2 years of this journey. But when I started, not many people knew much about it. I went to auditors and some of the compliance people and sort of reverse engineered the roles that way. Good question.
Okay, that's all the time we have for
All right.
questions.